Well, it's not the easiest thing for me to sit back and say what I'm most proud of myself for having accomplished. Usually I wait for those things to come from others that I respect and trust. So I'll tell you what my mom said to me once. We were walking around Brooklyn one day, and I was pushing my youngest daughter in her stroller. We were waiting to cross at a traffic light, and my mom turned to me and said, "Now I can finally say to you what my mother said to me when she came to see me in Johannesburg a little while after you were born." And then she said, "I'm proud of you." In the moment, I cocked my head to one side, exposing my jugular, and I said, Thanks, Mom," not feeling like I'd accomplished much and knowing that this was just the beginning after all. And then she said, "No, I mean it." And I knew she did. I think I know what she meant. Like her, I had left my hometown and I was living with my husband and a new baby in a bustling metropolis. I suppose that New York was to Johannesburg what Johannesburg was to Port Elizabeth in those days, and I was, in her eyes, thriving, even if I felt in my own heart that I still had, and definitely have, a long way to go. It was an eye-opening moment, because it let me see what she valued. She knew how hard it had been for her, and she knew how strong I would have to be to continue in my endeavors. And she wanted to say that she understood. All this to say that I think accomplishments are in the eye of the beholder. But I will say that in terms of important accomplishments, 3 children, 4 languages, and having mostly kept my sense of humor through it all, rank pretty high up there. I write picture books. I'm writing a novel, and I have a draft of an early chapter book with series potential. What I'm saying is that I have very different inspirations for each genre or age group. But across the board, I'll say that good writing inspires me to write. Having something to say inspires me to write. Having something to share is a huge motivation. The desire to impart a feeling or a journey, that inspires me to write. A novelist whom I loved to read was Maeve Binchy. I could get lost in an Irish town and feel like I knew everyone who was living there. I'm constantly inspired by new picture books. John Clausen, Mac Barnett. Those are picture book creators with a dry sense of humor and a slightly skew perspective on the world, and it just floors me. And every time I go into a bookshop and I pick up a beautifully written, excellently executed, marvelously illustrated picture book, I just think, this is so gorgeous, and I'm inspired to strive for the same quality. A vivid, memorable journey with friends through a cold and enchanting landscape to a special place where ribbons of color stretch and flow over the endless night sky and simply take your breath away. Well, it began with a love of reading, but more as a tween than before that. I'm not like those very young kids today who love to write, imitating their heroes like Dave Pilkey and making up illustrated stories by the reams. That's admirable. I came to writing for pure pleasure a few years later, but I will say that I really started to enjoy being able to construct an essay at high school. It sounds so boring, I know, but writing an essay is like putting together a puzzle, and I love it. Well, a good writer has to be able to make a reader forget that they're reading a book. Their eyes are moving, their body is still, and their soul has been transported to a completely different place. For that, the author needs a dash of invisibility powder, some rich, smooth language, and a facility with the tools that gently manipulate the reader's fertile imagination. Well, there are different times in a writer's life. Broadly, there are times when they are creating and times when they're promoting. Recently, I've been in a promoting and production phase of the writer's life, also highly important and very necessary. But since I don't have the opportunity at the moment to be writing every day, I find it useful to have a dedicated few hours in a coffee shop or at a park, 1 or 2 days a week, that I can manage. I need to be away from all the distractions, and I cherish those times. And I get other things done outside of those hours. So I probably started writing Aurora Borealis in early 2018. I believed that I had completed it, and I began submitting it left, right, and center in about July 2019. Needless to say, it probably wasn't ready, and I then began the process of editing it in great and minuscule detail before finally submitting it to Pegasus Publishers in 2023. And it's now 2025, so this book has been 7 years in the making. The most challenging part of writing this book was perhaps deciding and figuring out how much actual educational information to include. In the end, I decided to be true to the facts, but to leave room for inquiring minds to ask questions. I explain the phenomenon of the Aurora Borealis through the eyes of the character Borealis, the narwhal, as she relates what a wise whale once told her. Borealis tells Aurora the correct information, but her explanation adds a bit of whimsy and ignites the reader's curiosity. I would say just to keep engaged with the writing community and to access all that it has to offer in terms of learning and encouragement, writing, rewriting, reviewing, putting it aside, learning from others, and then coming back to it with fresh eyes. Those are all important and extremely valuable steps in the creation process. Write, write, rewrite, and repeat. If you don't have anything on that proverbial blank page, you don't have anything to work with. And that's where the fun starts.